My husband divorced me by text message, declaring in a single, careless note, "I'm leaving you and moving to Miami with my 20-year-old babe. I've already emptied our joint account, haha," and while he thought this would break me, I simply replied, "Good luck," knowing full well that by the time he realized the irreversible consequence of his actions, it was already too late for him to undo the mess he had created. Arrived while I was assisting customers at my boutique, I got the message, "I'm leaving you and heading to Miami with my 20-year-old girlfriend." I had already drained our joint account. I read the text without a tremor and helped Mrs. Peterson select a scarf without missing a beat. The only sign that my husband of many years had just terminated our marriage via text was a slight tightening around my eyes. I waited until Mrs. Peterson left, her purchase wrapped in our signature silver paper, before typing my response, "Good luck. My name is Claire, and at 38, I just received the most heartless goodbye ever." While Mark was likely celebrating his grand exit, imagining me breaking down over his betrayal, I was calmly locking up my boutique for the day. The warning signs had been there for months: late nights at work that never matched his paychecks, sudden password changes on his phone, and his newfound dedication to the gym, new clothes, and chasing his lost youth. 3 months ago, I discovered a receipt for dinner for two at an upscale restaurant on a night he claimed to be working late. That same evening, I opened a separate bank account at another institution. A week later, when he suggested merging our accounts for simplicity, I agreed cheerfully while transferring my personal savings to the new account. The joint account he just emptied held just enough to cover 2 months of routine deposits, while the rest was safely stashed away along with detailed records of every suspicious transaction he'd made over the past year. My phone buzzed again. "Don't bother begging, Melissa, and I leave tomorrow. I'll have someone pick up my things later." Melissa, the new receptionist at his office, whom I met at the company Christmas party, laughed too loudly at Mark's jokes and casually touched his arm when she thought no one was watching. She was young enough to be his daughter and naive enough to believe she was special. I didn't reply to his text. Instead, I called my lawyer, the one I'd consulted 2 months ago when I found those hotel charges on our credit card statement. "It's time to act," I said simply. "He just made his move." "The papers are ready," she replied. "Do you want me to have him served in Miami?" "No rush, let him think he's the one in control." Another text from Mark read, "I know this must be hard for you, you're not getting any younger. At least you have your little shop to keep you busy." My little shop, the thriving boutique I built from scratch that generated more income than his middle management job, the one whose profits I had carefully separated from our joint finances, made me smile as I imagined the certified letters that would soon greet him in Miami. Let him relish his moment of triumph. I spent that evening in our house, my house, since I inherited it from my grandmother and kept it solely in my name, despite Mark's repeated requests to be added to the deed. Another lucky instinct had paid off. While organizing the paperwork for my lawyer, I came across our wedding album. Mark looked so different back then, before his midlife crisis transformed him into a shadow of his former self. Now, he sported shirts too tight for his softening midsection and tried way too hard to connect with his colleagues, using slang that sounded absurd coming from a 45-year-old. My phone continued buzzing with texts from him, each one more condescending than the last. "I've been planning this for months. Melissa understands me in ways you never could. You'll be fine, maybe you'll find someone closer to your age." I'd already informed my family, and they agreed. Things had simply grown apart. It wasn't really anyone's fault. I screenshot every message, filing them away as evidence. Let him dig his own grave. My lawyer would appreciate his casual display of premeditation, especially his smug announcement about emptying our account. The final text caught my attention. "By the way, I used a joint card to book our flights and hotel. Consider it my parting gift." LOL. Perfect. I then called the credit card company. "Mrs. Harrison speaking. I need to report fraudulent charges and cancel my card immediately." "Of course, ma'am. Can you specify the charges?" 2 first-class tickets to Miami booked for today, hotel charges at the Royal Palm, and please remove my husband as an authorized user." I have texts where he admits to using our joint card to book travel for his girlfriend after emptying our bank account. The representative's professional tone couldn't quite conceal her satisfaction as she canceled the charges. Mark and Melissa would show up at the airport tomorrow to find their tickets invalid and their hotel reservation canceled. Then my phone buzzed once more. "Don't worry about the house, you can stay there until you find something smaller." I couldn't help but laugh. Did he really think he had any claim to my grandmother's house? Had his ego grown so big he forgot whose name was on the deed? Another buzz came in. "I know the shop means a lot to you. We can work out a fair payment for your half, my half of the business that I built, funded, and grew, while you complained about my long hours and called it your hobby." I poured a glass of the good wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. Tomorrow, Mark would learn some hard lessons about property law and separate assets, but tonight, I was ready to enjoy the quiet and plan my next chapter. Later, a barrage of angry texts from Mark followed. "What the heck did you do to our credit card? The airline isn't honoring our tickets and the hotel canceled our reservation, answer me." I silenced my phone and headed back to my boutique. Friday was always our busiest day, and I had a fresh shipment of designer handbags to unpack. Life goes on even when your husband runs off with a receptionist young enough to be his daughter. Around noon, his mother called. "Claire, dear," she said, "Mark told us everything about how controlling you've been and how you drove him away. Now he's saying you're being vindictive and causing problems with his travel plans." I put her on speaker while arranging a new window display. "Did he mention emptying our joint account and charging tickets for him and his girlfriend on our credit card?" I asked. There was silence, then she added, "He said you left him no choice, that you'd been cold and distant." "I've got his messages. Should I read the one where he boasted about taking our money or the one where he made fun of my age?" There was a pause. He did come off as pretty harsh. I told him his text was out of line. "Thanks for calling, Barbara. I've always respected you, but it's best if we end this conversation now." My lawyer advised keeping any contact with Mark's family to a minimum during these proceedings. "Proceedings already?" she asked before we said goodbye. By late afternoon, Mark's sister Amanda was busy spreading family rumors through our mutual friends. Apparently, Mark and Melissa were stuck in a rundown motel near the airport, his Miami dreams temporarily derailed. He even tried using his personal credit cards, which had been maxed out for months. Another red flag. Shortly after, my lawyer called with an update. The emergency hearing was set for Monday. Given his admission of emptying our joint account and the solid proof of his credit card fraud, we're in a strong position to freeze all remaining assets. "Has he been served yet?" I asked. "Not yet, but he'll receive the papers at his new motel address," came the reply. And speaking of addresses, his girlfriend's social media has turned into a goldmine of evidence. She's been posting about their escapade all day, even throwing in some pointed remarks about you. I couldn't help but smile, remembering my own careful documentation, a year's worth of suspicious charges, hotel receipts, and texts that proved premeditation. Mark was so busy planning his grand escape that he never imagined I'd be watching, waiting, and preparing. Then my phone buzzed with another text. "You think you're so clever, but I made copies of all the boutique's financial records. Half that business is mine." I immediately forwarded the text to my lawyer, adding it to the growing file of Mark's mistakes. Let him learn the hard way about separate assets and business ownership. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being prepared. Monday's emergency hearing went exactly as I hoped. Mark arrived in a new, youthful wardrobe, designer jeans clinging too tightly and a blazer screaming midlife crisis. Outside, Melissa waited, her youth painfully obvious under the harsh courthouse lighting. My lawyer then methodically presented our evidence, Mark's gleeful text about emptying our account, his credit card fraud, and the documented trail of hidden expenses, each piece gathered over months of discreet observation. "Your Honor," Mark's hastily hired lawyer claims my client admits to some rash decisions, but Mrs. Harrison's actions have been vindictive and calculating, he began. "Calculating," my lawyer countered. "I'd call it prudent. My client protected her separate assets and maintained detailed records of her husband's suspicious behavior. That's not vindictive, it's smart business," the judge noted as he reviewed my evidence, the separate property deed to our house, the boutique's incorporation papers in my name. It was the careful separation of business and personal finances that Mark had always grumbled about. "Mr. Harrison," the judge addressed Mark directly, "you admitted via text to deliberately emptying a joint account and using shared credit cards to fund a trip with your girlfriend. Do you deny this?" Mark shifted uncomfortably. "I was just trying to make a clean break by committing financial fraud," he stammered. The judge raised an eyebrow. "And now you're claiming rights to property that, according to our documentation, is clearly separate from marital assets. The business grew during your marriage." Mark's lawyer tried to interject. "My client is entitled to," my lawyer, I interrupted firmly, and Mrs. Harrison maintained a strict separation between business and personal finances throughout. "We have documentation of every dollar invested and earned." I watched Mark's face fall as reality set in. He thought it would be easy, empty our accounts, run off with his girlfriend, maybe claim half my business in the divorce. He'd never understood why I insisted on keeping things separate, dismissing my meticulous bookkeeping as obsessive. "The court finds sufficient evidence of financial misconduct," the judge announced. "All shared assets are frozen pending final dissolution. Mr. Harrison, return any funds removed from joint accounts within 24 hours. "But that money's gone," Mark protested. "We spent it," I replied. "Now you'll have to figure out a way to replace it." The judge cut him off. "Mr. Harrison, the court takes a very dim view of using shared credit cards to fund escapades with paramours." Outside the courthouse, I overheard Melissa asking Mark about their Miami plans, but his response was lost beneath the sound of my heels clicking confidently on the marble floor as I headed back to the business he'd never understood or respected. In the following weeks, Mark's moves became increasingly desperate. He claimed the boutique had been his idea, remembering investing money in its early days, and even suggested he'd been my business partner all along. These claims were quickly disproven by my meticulous records. "He's getting desperate," my lawyer observed. Meanwhile, his girlfriend's social media showed they were now staying at her tiny studio apartment, apparently living on a receptionist's salary, not quite the glamorous escape he had imagined. Then, Mark's family began reaching out, their tone markedly different from their earlier accusations. We learned from his sister Amanda that he had confessed you'd been cold and controlling and that he needed to escape. But then his texts surfaced, the ones in which he bragged about taking your money. "That's not the brother I thought I knew," she remarked. His mother called again, this time in tears, recalling the hurtful things he said about your age and how he planned to replace you with someone younger. "I raised him better than that," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure if I had. I let their calls go to voicemail. What might once have meant something now felt like rats abandoning a sinking ship. Ironically, the boutique thrived, buoyed by local gossip about my situation. Women began coming in specifically to show their support, often leaving with far more than they had planned to buy. My ex tried a similar tactic. One customer confided while purchasing a designer handbag that she expected he'd take everything in the divorce. "Men like him never assume we aren't smarter." Meanwhile, my phone continued to buzz with texts from Mark, his tone swinging between anger and manipulation. "You ruined everything. I never meant to hurt you. You'll regret being so vindictive. Can't we work something out?" That business would be nothing without my support. I forwarded every message to my lawyer without responding, letting him dig his own hole deeper through the grapevine. I heard Melissa had second thoughts. Apparently, sharing her tiny studio with a middle-aged guy who couldn't afford his own place wasn't the adventure she once imagined. What had seemed like an exciting age gap romance during secret hotel getaways now looked harsh in the unforgiving light of reality. She'd been posting about toxic relationships and learning hard lessons. Just yesterday, my lawyer mentioned during an update call that Melissa had changed her relationship status. This morning, I almost felt a twinge of sympathy for Mark, but then I remembered his cold confession about emptying our joint account. Instead of pity for his callous comments about my age and his assumption that I'd be helpless without him, I felt pride in my foresight and quiet strength. I had always known how to protect myself, even when he underestimated me. At the final divorce hearing, the courtroom told a different story from Mark's imagined triumph. His cocky swagger was gone, replaced by barely concealed panic. Melissa was noticeably absent. She'd moved on to a coworker her own age, as the office buzz confirmed. Mark showed up in his old clothes, his once impressive wardrobe now apparently just a way to cover up the damage done to our account. His lawyer, looking exhausted from digging through our asset separation records, tried one last time to claim that my support for his wife's business growth warranted a share of the proceeds. My lawyer cut in sharply, dismissing that moral support could ever justify belittling my boutique as a mere hobby or a small shop on social media. The judge had seen enough. The final settlement honored my careful planning. I kept my house, my business, and all my separate assets, while Mark was left with his personal belongings and a car worth less than what he owed. As we left the courthouse, he hissed, "You've destroyed me." I almost felt sorry for him until I remembered his heartless text about emptying our account. "No, Mark, you destroyed yourself. I just made sure you couldn't destroy me too," I thought. His mother was waiting outside, ready to drive him back to her place, a new home for a 45-year-old man who once mocked my age, now forced to retreat to his childhood bedroom while I continued to run my successful business. "You planned this all along, didn't you?" he accused. "You knew this would happen." I replied, "No, I just paid attention, and unlike you, I understood the importance of keeping good records." His mother stepped between us. "Enough, Mark. You've embarrassed yourself enough already," she scolded as they walked away. I couldn't help but smile, feeling the relief of knowing that his cruel text wasn't the final word, it was merely the spark that set my plans in motion. My phone buzzed, not with his messages, but with notifications of new orders from my boutique's website. Life was moving forward, just not in the direction he'd imagined. 6 months after our divorce was finalized, my boutique had expanded to a second location. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Mark struggled to piece his life back together, the little shop he once dismissed was thriving. I had hired 3 new employees and even launched an online store that was quickly gaining traction. As whispers about Mark's downfall spread, it became clear that his dating apps were failing him, and office gossip was warning Melissa's friends to stay away. Even his career took a hit. After an investigation into his inappropriate relationship with a subordinate, his expected promotion went to someone with a clean slate. His claims of age discrimination were tossed aside as yet another excuse. I now plan for a 3rd boutique location and even a luxury accessories line. The only reminder of Mark's impact hangs in my office, a framed screenshot of his final text reading, "Have fun with your little shop, at least it keeps you busy in your old age." It sits right next to my latest business award, proof that sometimes the best revenge is simply succeeding on your own terms. I hosted the grand opening of my third boutique location, and the event drew local media attention. The story they wanted to tell wasn't about my failed marriage, it was about a successful businesswoman expanding her brand. Mark's betrayal had become nothing more than a footnote in my success story. During the event, Melissa walked in unexpectedly. She looked younger than ever, or maybe I just felt that much stronger. She clutched her purse tightly, shifting uncomfortably. "I owe you an apology," she said softly. "I believed everything he told me, that you were cold, controlling, that you never supported his dreams. Then I watched him try the same manipulation tactics on me when things got tough." I continued arranging a display of designer sunglasses. "Those weren't his dreams, Melissa. They were escapes. There's a difference." She nodded. "I know that now." Then, after a pause, she added, "He tried to move in when you froze the accounts. Thought my tiny studio apartment was just temporary. After 2 weeks of complaining about my closet space and suggesting I take out a loan for a bigger place, I finally understood what you meant about the difference between dreams and escapes." I actually laughed. "Let me guess, he had big plans but no way to fund them." "Exactly," she sighed. "Everything was going to work out once his investments paid off, once he got that promotion, once his cryptocurrency skyrocketed." She shook her head. "I'm dating someone my own age now. We have student loans and a small apartment, but at least we're building something real." After she left, my assistant manager leaned in and whispered, "Was that the girlfriend?" "No," I replied, watching Melissa disappear into the crowd. "That was just another woman who learned the same lesson I did." Speaking of lessons, I gestured toward a young couple admiring our designer handbags. "Let's go over your idea for expanding our accessories line." The boutique had become more than just a business. It was a symbol of independence, resilience, and the power of preparation. Young entrepreneurs often sought my advice, and I always emphasized the importance of protecting their assets. Mark's mother called me one last time, not to talk about Mark, but to thank me. "You taught our family an important lesson," she admitted. "About enabling bad behavior. About making excuses for cruelty. Mark's still living at home, still blaming everyone else for his problems. But we're not defending him anymore. That was my real legacy, not just success, but the ability to see the difference between supporting someone and enabling them." As I reviewed plans for my fourth boutique location, I thought about how Mark had tried to diminish me, trade me in for someone younger, and take half of everything I had built. Instead, he had pushed me to become even stronger and more successful. My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. Mark filed another petition to revisit the settlement. The judge dismissed it immediately and ordered him to pay court costs. "Thought you'd enjoy that," I smiled, picturing him still in his childhood bedroom, desperately trying to rewrite an ending that had already been decided the moment he underestimated me. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting better. 2 years after Mark's cruel text message, I received an invitation to speak at a women's business conference. The topic wasn't divorce or betrayal, it was about building and protecting a successful business. My story had evolved from a cautionary tale to an inspiration. During the Q&A, a woman asked, "How do you keep business and personal finances separate?" "My husband says I'm being paranoid, that marriage means sharing everything." "My ex-husband said the same thing," I replied. "Right up until he tried to take half my business in our divorce." Trust your instincts. Protection isn't paranoia. By then, my boutique chain had grown to 5 locations, each more successful than the last. The little shop Mark had mocked now employed 30 people and had been featured in national magazines. Through mutual friends, I heard he had finally moved out of his parents' house, into a small apartment above a garage. He had taken a lower-paying job after his company downsized, eliminating his position. His dating profile still listed him as young at heart, though his photo was clearly outdated. Ironically, Melissa had become a regular customer at my first boutique. She had earned her business degree and started her own social media consulting firm. "You inspired me," she told me once. "You showed me how a woman can build something lasting instead of falling for empty promises." I kept Mark's cruel text message framed in my office, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of how far I had come. Below it hung a sign that read, "Success is the best revenge." At the 5-year anniversary celebration of my original boutique, I stood in front of my employees and loyal customers. What had started as a single shop had grown into the flagship store of a thriving business empire. Mark's mother was there, though I hadn't invited her. She waited until the crowd thinned before approaching me. "I saw Mark yesterday," she said, smoothing out her designer dress, one she had bought from my store.